This fantasy map took me 17 days to draw and I used over 30 social media suggestions. Narra'Loranis, a cool yet humid land filled with vast jungles and forests, has a deep, mostly obscure history, filled with myths of giants, megastorms, dragons, and cat warriors. But more than any of these, Narra'Loranis is most well known for its fabled continent-wide jungle. And this is the story of the Narra'an forest and its imminent demise. Green foliage once covered the face of the eastern lands. Trees of all types grew to legendary heights in the forest. They even had names, the Titan trees. Trunks wider than 3 men made up the walls of the forest, and canopies taller than any tower grew above the forest floor. Many small biomes made their home in the forested land, and countless animals lived under the branches. The great jungle lived in peaceful harmony for many a century. Humanity stayed west in their strongholds, keeping away from the dark forest of Narra. Ymir they called the land. Unknown horrors stalked through the forest, and few were brave enough to venture in. But some did. Forced out by society by their kin, Ymirians, as they became known as, ventured into the darkness. Yet they didn't find darkness. Tribes grew and ventured deeper into the forest. Cultures diversified, some forgetting their western origins. Centuries passed with tribes fighting occasionally and spreading out among the forest lands, finding their desired homeland. A few became prominent, some trading with the others became more warlike, some more tranquil. But the forest was big enough for everyone. Several millennia eventually passed as tribes grew and shrunk, politics fluctuated, and trade came and went. And still the attention of the West was elsewhere. Over the more than 3,000 years of Western ignorance, no major attention was drawn to the forest. It still sat as the Ymir, dark and menacing. But slowly, that began to change. The Adventurers Guild began to bud in the regions south of the Ymir, and enthusiastic explorers soon began to venture all over the continent. But still the Ymir stood in the way of their grand dreams. It wasn't long till an exploration was soon organized. Johann Turn came from the palace city of Alesia in Araceli, and was one of the first members of the guild. He had a curious but ferocious mind, and growing up with the spoiled politics of the capital, expected that he would get what he wanted always. One summer evening, Johann sat lounging on the lawn of his friend's, Alkmaar Weddish's eastern estate. The grand holiday mansion sat on a vast green plain that bordered the Ymir. Dark and foreboding, the forest sat on the horizon, the Titan trees standing as a fortress wall, protecting what lay beyond. "Do you ever wonder what's beyond yonder?" he asked, sipping his overly expensive drink. "The Ymir, of course," answered Alkmaar. "No, beyond it, over its obtrusive canopy." Alkmaar thought for a second and shrugged it off. "The Ymir goes on forever, Johann. Put it out of your mind." "How do you know, though?" "I don't. I am a banker." "Exactly," Johann answered proudly. "You don't know, but I shall." "Quit being foolish, Torn. You won't find out what's beyond the Ymir because there is nothing." "There is, and I shall. I will show you that I'm right, Alkmaar Weddish." Preparations for the 30-man exploration were soon underway, provisions packed and horses loaded. It was barely a month later that Torin set off from the Adventurers Guild with his 30 companions and 48 horses. After a few weeks of riding, Torin and his men arrived at the foot of the Ymir, the titan trees rising high, high into the sky. Some began to tremble and glance wearily into the forest. Johann saw it on the faces of his men. "Don't act like women, you fools," he scrutinized their scared faces. "Act like the adventurers you are, or go back to the guild like cowards." He watched expectantly, but when no man turned back, he led the group into the trees. Once their eyes adjusted to the forest dimness, they could see the golden light filtering through the leaves hundreds of feet above. Animals scattered before them, and peaceful silence filled the trees once they could no longer see the outside world. No one dared speak or make any sounds besides the shuffling of their feet as they walked, but Johann hummed happily as he weaved through the trees northward. Torin's mood slowly diminished as weeks of travel passed. As far as he knew, no change had taken place in the forest, and no end of the forest was in sight. 3 months after Torin and company departed the Adventurers Guild, they stumbled upon a small village and its inhabitants. The strange tree people spoke a similar language to the Aracelians, and they were easily able to understand each other. A week the adventurers spent with the tribe, then growing bored, they moved on after trading some wares with the tribe. Johann quickly began to get frustrated with the size of the forest. Snapping at his men and pushing them far into the night, or not even traveling the next day, it did not take much for Johann to get mad. So when they came across an aggressive group of tribesmen, Johann was quick to become the aggressor. The groups colliding resulted in the tree people scattering back to where they had come, but Johann, happily taking his anger out in full, would not let them escape. The adventurer pursued the tribal warriors far off their course, fully focused on their helpless opponents. Johann hunted them for 3 days, counting 20 remaining. On the 3rd day, Torin decided to burn the trees to smoke the warriors out. The fire started small, then soon spread to a nearby tree by hot embers. Then the fire began to spread, and was too big to stop by the time it was noticed. Many of the adventurers fled from the fire, its flame too hot to approach. But 7 of the 30 remained with Johann to complete the hunt. Slowly and methodically, Johann took out the remaining warriors, then, once he was completed, became the hunted. The fire was now flying from tree to tree at rapid speed. Chased by the wall of fire, Torin fled north with his 7, unable to rest from the relentless fire. The adventurers were later found by homeless tribespeople, dead and charred. The Great Fire of Torin is what it became known as. It raged endlessly for 5 months, decimating 90% of the forest. Charred titans stood as black pillars for endless miles, and thousands of tree people died. Hundreds now lived homeless. Leagues away from the forest, Aracelians watched as a giant wall of fire and smoke engulfed the horizon, clouds upon clouds of ash and smoke hovering and falling over the western cities. Many more outside the great forest perished, and many lived on in constant terror. It took centuries for the massive wound that the fire of Torin inflicted to begin to heal. Ash-laden cities were no more, and many of the inhabitants had left. The tree people of the Narra'Loranis forest transitioned to a nomadic lifestyle, searching for the scarce animals and plants, and many starved to death. The hardiest of the tribes set to cutting down the remaining blackened trunks, building permanent homes out of them and trading the rest. War and famine was prevalent in those days. Civilizations fell en masse, and would not be rebuilt for a millennium. But deep under the layers of ash, fertile soil was beginning to set forth its seed. Soon, the world would be rebuilt.